We as a group created a project for a library management system using TurboC++. We are here to explain how our program and code works, so let me introduce to you my members. Mr. Geñoso will explain the login and register portion. Mr. Grafil will explain the browse books portion. Mr. Enriquez will explain functions, namely my books and user list. Mr. Maquiñana will talk about adding and removing a book. And lastly, Mr. Lorenzana will talk about borrowing and returning a book function. Enjoy!
So I'll be explaining how the register and login function works. So for register, we're gonna input the last 7 digits of our student ID. Then it's gonna store it in username. Then we will call out the function check username. So here we declared in stored username. This will serve as a variable that we can store the data from the file. We're gonna use ifstream to open a file that we're gonna use admin.txt. We're gonna use while loop, open parenthesis, then file, then stored username. This is gonna put the file stored in stored username together. Then if statement, here we're gonna use a string compare, and it's gonna compare the stored username and the new input username. Then if the statement is true, it means the username is already taken and return to 1. If it's false, it will return to 0 and ask for your password. After inputting the password, we're going to call out register. So here we're gonna open 2 files, one for the user and one for the admin. So for the user, we're gonna use if statement to compare the username and password. If the username and password compares to true, it will check if you're a user or admin. For admin, the password and username is already given. After registration, the login function reads the user's input file, admin.txt, and uses a while loop to store names and password. If the input is true, the user page continues. If false, the login page returns an invalid username, and it will check if you're an admin or a user. If you're an admin, it will go through admin page.
Hey there, I'm explaining a program that allows user to browse book in our library. I'm starting off with defining function called browse book, and then I use a clear string function to make sure that user interface is clean. Next, I create a function to output catalogs, which user can select from it, find the books they're interested in, and I use switch case function to make browse faster and easier to use. Then if user select option 1 in the catalog, the program calls user-defined function called FictionCat. Now, right after choosing case 1, we are moving to another code to show available books in our library, same as to other catalogs. I indicate letter X integers the number to books 1 by 1. Now I'm using ifstream function to open and call data from a file called fiction.txt. Then we will use a while loop to display all the fiction books in file in 1 by 1. And now, the increment function is to add number in order starting to 1 and so on and so forth. Then we will close the file, and after outputting the list, before going to main page, we need to go check function to avoid bugs from the main page of the user and admin. Since the user is the same browse function, we will call check function to bring them back to their main pages. The check function uses the ifstream function to open that admin.txt file, which stores the username and password of our user that registered to our library. And I use while loop to call the file again, and if-else function to compare every single line of data search for the username and password. If the username is admin and the password is admin pass, the user is rerouted to the admin page. If the username and password are false, the user is redirected to a user page.
Proceeding my books function. We will be starting the program by clearing the screen and then output my books. We then declare constant integer max equals 100 character line, putting inside the integer max, and then string copy to copy the data from username to file name, and then string concatenate file 's.txt. The purpose of concatenate is combine the two variables inside the parentheses. The line now will dictate what is the line you want to skip. We will be creating while loop, reading the file of the user, and use getLine line. Size of line to output the data from the file one by one. If file end in line num is not equals to 1, it will output a numbering starting from 1 and push line to output the title. If not, it will not be shown and it will be skipped. Similar to that, let me also explain the codes behind the user list function. The code is the same from the myBooks function. It's only difference by which the file is reading. With the myBooks, it reads the user file, but with the user list, it reads the admin's file.
Starting off with user-defined function named addBooks, then starting our program by clearing the screen. I will be only explaining one if statement because the codes are all the same but with different txt file for each respective category. We will be using string copy to copy the data from the title to the variable depending on the category. Then we will be using offstream to create a file, naming it by the name of their category. After that, we will be using offstream to create a file, naming it business.txt, and then using iOS append to write on it. The data on the business will be written to the file. Then we will now be closing the file. After adding the book to their categories, we will now be checking if the title is also written on the return list. We will declare three variables. We will be using ifstream to read the file return list, then using offstream to open another file, naming it temp.txt. Then lastly, offstream again to open another file, naming it trash.txt. Creating while loop to read the file 1, which is return list, and input each data one by one to our title. We will be using if statement, and inside it, strcmp to compare the our title to title, and if it's true, the current line will be equals to 1. Then, the R fiction will be written to file 4, which is the trash.txt, to remove the added book from the return list. Then, if the current line is not equal to 1, that means the title we do not want to remove from the return list. Hence, we will be writing to the temp.txt, which is temporary file. And then we will now close all the files. After that, we will be put getch to pause. We will remove the original file, which is the return list, then renaming the temporary file as the new return list, and then deleting the trash file completely. Moving forward to removing a book function, it's very similar to the last line of codes from the addBooks function. The difference is, the addBooks, it removes the books from the return list and put it in the library, but with the remove books function, it removes the books from the return list completely and not added anywhere. This is called the user interface function, borrow books. It allows the user to borrow books from different genres. To start the program, we are to declare 2 characters, data, and copy line, each with a size of 50 characters. We will also declare 3 integer variables, current line, genre, and book written, and we will initialize them to 0. We will clear the previous screen to output the borrow books menu. Then the user can choose genre by entering the corresponding number. And now we will be using if statement. If the user input genre is equal to 1, it will open the file fiction.txt for reading. Now we will use while loop to read each line from the file fiction.txt until there are no more lines to read. We will increment the value of x to display as numbering on each line of the fiction file. Then use curly braces to end the while loop. After that, we will close the file fiction.txt. We will now use string copy to copy the content of the username into the file name. Concatenate s.txt. We will use offstream to create a file specified by file name for writing in append mode. And we will open fiction.txt for reading. This is where the user will enter book they want to borrow. Now we will open a temporary file named temp.txt for writing. We will use while loop to read each line from the file fiction.txt into the data variable. Now we will check if the data and copy line variable is equal using string compare. If it is equal, then the condition is true and the input will be written into the file 1. If the condition is not true, the data will be written in file 2. After that, we will close all the files and we will remove original fiction.txt and rename temp.txt as the new fiction.txt. Proceeding in return books, it is just the same as borrowing a book. Instead of taking the data from the library, we will now be taking the data from the user to the return list.